Okay, I'm going to never like these things, but call this meeting to order. This is the second meeting of the Citizens Bond Oversight Committee for Measure G. I'm Bob Peters. I'm the interim chair for this process. It'll probably be a multi-year process, as is the proposal for Measure G project. So a multi-year process. So we'll get to know each other over time. We'll be meeting. We'll talk about meeting schedule later, but I anticipate at least a quarterly meeting. We have some obligations to the public. That's essentially why we're here, to make sure that the public has confidence that somebody from a citizen perspective is looking at what the district is doing and filing a report at the end of the year that outlines what it's looked at and its conclusions relative to what its obligations are, which is to ensure that the amounts that are spent on the measures that are outlined in Measure G, and that no amounts have been spent for salaries or other school operations. Measure G fell under this provision that allows the Citizens Oversight Board to conduct this oversight operation. And as a result, the bond only required a 55% approval rate rather than 2/3 approval rate. So that was the trade-off when the law was changed years ago. You can have a lower percentage of voters approving it as long as the citizens are looking actively at what's happening. So that's our job. With that as an introduction, a roll call for individuals on the committee. I'll start with myself. I'm here. Let's see. Shen here. John Moriarty. Here. Jessica Newman.
Yeah.
Suzanne Podell.
Yes.
Great. Tyler Will here. Okay. Melissa McCarthy.
Here.
McClatchy. Yeah. Okay. I see that Chris Bailey, who's an alternate, is sitting out there. I'm not sure if there are others. And I see. Oh.
Joy.
Okay. Joy. Great. Nice to meet you. And I see that we have a board member present as well. Good morning. Since let's see, I'll ask for a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll move to approve the agenda.
Any second for that? Second. Okay. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that motion carries and the agenda is approved. Since we met once before, I think it was over a video, we have not actually had a chance to get to know each other. And the board, the public doesn't have a clue who we are. So I thought we would actually begin by giving maybe a minute or so of who you are. I'll start with that process. So Roger Peters, I live in Mill Valley. I've lived here about 30 years. My spouse is Stephanie Moulton Peters. You probably recognize that. Supervisor for this district. We have two sons, Steve and Dave, who both went to Old Mill School, Middle School, and Cam High. I was on CFAC when they were in school here, and I was the chair of the oversight committee previously. In my working life, I was an attorney for 30 years for PG&E, and the last 9 years I was general counsel of the utility. So I know a little bit about controversy, and I think that's about all about me. Jessica.
I'm Jessica Newman. I have two kids at Old Mill, 4th and 5th grade. And I also ran the Measure G campaign in the spring, so I've been involved with this for the last couple of years. In terms of my professional background, I have a background in consulting and project management.
Hi, Melissa Yapel McClatchy, mom to two students currently at Edna McGuire, a 3rd grader and a 5th grader. I'm currently part of the CFAC committee, which Roger noted, and so representing that group here on DOC. And professionally, I'm have the good fortune to be on a sabbatical this year, but I am in high-tech sales and marketing.
Hi, I'm Shan Cho. I have two kids, 5th grade twins at 5th, so they're going to middle school after this summer. I'm an architect, as an office in San Francisco.
My name is Suzanne Fidel. I have a kindergartner at Park School here in Mill Valley. And we have moved here in 2019 and excited to be part of the community. And my background is business operations for a large corporation and overseeing a lot of capital investment projects as well.
Hi, Tyler Will. I have three sons. The oldest of whom is a first grader at Strawberry Point. And then professionally, I work in tech and sales and strategy.
So I'm John Moriarty. We've been in Mill Valley for 14 years. I have three sons. One's at Edna, one's at the middle school, and the other also was at Edna earlier in his life. Professionally, I'm an attorney by training. So starting out as an assistant U.S. attorney, an oversight responsibility of prosecuting government fraud. And then for the last dozen years, I've been general counsel of 4 global pharmaceutical companies with oversight of legal affairs, government affairs, and corporate affairs.
So we have we have 3 of the alternates here present, and although they're not voting members, I'm sure they will be active participants. And so, Chris, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
I'm Chris Bailey. I have 2 sons, one third grader in Old Mill and one at the middle school here in 6th grade. Been in Mill Valley for 7 years now. I'm an investor in renewable energy projects for about 16 years, mostly solar and wind. Deployed about $8 billion of investments in that space. And I own my own company here in Sausalito.
Hi, I'm Joy Koo. I have 3 children. 1 in the middle school now and 2 who graduated from middle school are now at TAM and have an engineering background and pharmaceutical background, and excited to be what we can create with this project.
Hi, I'm Eunice Hong. I have 2 boys at Mill Valley Middle School. I have a graduate degree in interior design from Pratt in Brooklyn. I practiced prior to having kids, and then for a few years after, working in retail and hospitality. And the last big project I worked on was working at Harrods in London for, gosh, 3 plus, almost 4 years.
Okay, thank you all. An impressive group. I'm very happy to be here with all of you. As far as the staff, others, yes, I'm going to let that roll out in terms of the items that through. So let's go to presentations, and I think we're turning it over to F3, Jessica CE, and we're going to hear about our fiduciary responsibilities and our roles and limits on our roles. So I'll turn it over to you, Jessica.
Thank you to the chair and all the committee members for having us this morning. I'm Jessica Ehrlich, and my colleague Sehi Park and I are going to just run through exactly what the chair said, some of the fiduciary responsibilities of the Citizens Bond Oversight Committee. Please feel free to interrupt with any questions or comments, and we'll also are happy to take any questions at the end. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sehi, who's going to lead us through this presentation.
Great. Anna, are you able to control the screen for us?
I am.
Okay, if you want to move on to the next slide, thank you. So this is just a brief overview of the topics that we wanted to address. At our last meeting, when we met with you virtually, we gave a detailed overview of the Brown Act. And so we just wanted to give a couple reminders related to that. We'll dive into discussing the legislative purpose and duties of the CBOC as set forth in the Education Code and also in the CBOC's own bylaws. And related to that, we want to capture the concept of the oversight and advisory capacity of the CBOC, identify examples of specific permitted activities of the CBOC, briefly cover the authority of the facilities master plan and the bond measure language, and then lastly wrap up with just reminders about the committee's fiduciary responsibility. Next slide, please. So As just a reminder, we want to remind all of the committee members that the CBOC meetings are subject to the Brown Act. And so this means that all CBOC meetings are open to the public and are open to all of the open meeting laws that are set forth in the government code. Key kind of terms and concepts that you should be mindful of in terms of maintaining compliance with Brown Act is to ensure transparency, to ensure public involvement and access, and to conduct lawful, efficient, and organized meetings. And so with that in mind, the concept of serial meetings, they are clearly prohibited by the Brown Act. And so these encompass situations where you might have communications that are outside formal meetings, where individually it involves less than a quorum, but then because it gets passed on through those small groups, it collectively encompasses a majority. And so communications, and then similarly, communications of any kind cannot be used by a majority of members to discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item of business that's within the committee's subject matter jurisdiction. And so this means in particular avoiding any kind of reply all type emails, even though it starts off maybe with it can include multiple instances. It can include the second situation where everybody's on an email chain. And so as soon as you're replying all, then it's a majority that's potentially discussing matters outside of a formal meeting, even if it's emails or calls or in-person meetings between a few individuals. If those few individuals then go talk with another few individuals, that could also create serial meetings. And so whenever you're addressing topics that are within the committee's subject matter jurisdiction, we want to make sure that you are mindful of the types of settings in which these communications occur.
And I'll just chime in. I think, I believe today, the committee members are going to receive district email addresses. So this obviously applies to utilizing those district email addresses as well as your personal emails. And the overarching point of this is that committee business is supposed to take place open and with access to the public. So really at committee meetings. And so that's just something to keep in mind as there's out of committee communications.
Okay, next slide, please. And so we wanted to highlight the legislative purpose of why this committee exists. And so as set forth in law, the purpose of the CBOC is to inform the public concerning the expenditure of bond revenue. So that's the overarching umbrella under which the committee meets, reviews the district's bond related decisions and things like that. And so that's kind of the lens with which we the committee members should be approaching these meetings and your work. And so with that in mind, big groups of permitted activities would be, for the committee to continue to inform the public of what's going on related to the bond, reviewing the district's expenditures of the bond funds, which includes facilitating efficient and economical use of these expenditures. There's an annual reporting requirement of the CBOC, and the CBOC also must provide oversight on district accountability on how they're spending these funds. And this is set forth in both the Ed Code and also outlined in the CBOC's bylaws. Next slide.
Can I ask a question? So I know that we have the annual reporting responsibility. Is there an interim schedule by which we would update the public in some kind of like formal way? In between the annual report, such as at board meetings or in another format?
Go ahead.
Statutorily, I don't think there's any, requirements on timelines for those kind of reportings, but obviously because the role of the CBOC is to inform the public, that's why, we would recommend CBOC hold, regular meetings that are open to the public. And then you're also, as, committee members and as members of the public, welcome to attend the district board meetings to provide updates or things like that at those times as well. And so those would be, I think, the most accessible avenues through which you would be informing the public. Jessica, was there anything else that you were?
Yeah, I mean, just to add on to that, the committee in conjunction with, district staff can determine whether or not they want to have interim updates to the board, and agendize those at regularly scheduled board meetings, in addition to the annual reporting, as well as every committee meeting that you have is, basically updating the community on, what's going on with the bond program. And, that can, like I said, we can also do that at regularly scheduled board meetings on a quarterly basis or whenever necessary as determined, by the district staff.
Could I just ask as a clarification, when you get to the next section on section that addresses section 3.5 of the bylaws, there's a provision that reserves for the board the adoption of a plan for publicizing the activities of committees. So could you reconcile those two?
Right, so the committee itself can proceed to adopt that plan and then, also add to that plan, maybe one of those items is that there'll be updates to the board at regularly scheduled intervals. So there's a little flexibility there. It's not as rigid as some of the other requirements like the annual reporting. So it's really what's going to work best for the committee, the district, and the community that you all are serving.
Okay, so there's a dialogue intended there.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, there's no other questions. Next slide, please. So the CBOC, even by virtue of its name, is an oversight and advisory committee. And so the key aspect and role that it plays is that it is, providing advice and acting in an advisory capacity to the board and district staff. It's providing oversight of the district's expenditures of the bond revenues. And its role is distinguished from the board, which is the elected body that holds the decision-making authority related to this particular bond measure G. And so we want to make sure and reiterate that while the CBOC does play a crucial role in informing the public and providing oversight of the district's expenditures and such, that ultimately decisions related to how the bond funds are spent is in the authority of that elected body.
And that also includes any decisions regarding support for the bond measure, consultants, project priority, things like that, are part of the board's decision-making authority.
Yeah, and I think we have a slide with a few of those examples as well. Next slide, please. So this list, it's found both in the education code and also similarly summarized in the CBOC's bylaws, but we wanted to just identify these and highlight these activities for you. So as authorized in the Ed Code and as set forth in the CBOC's bylaws, section 4.1, the CBOC may engage in these listed activities to further its purpose of informing the public about the bond, the expenditure of the bond revenue. So it can receive and review copies of the annual independent performance audit and financial audit of the district. It can inspect school facilities and grounds to ensure that the bond revenues are being expended in compliance with the constitutional requirements. It can receive and review copies of any deferred maintenance proposals or plans developed by the school district, and including any reports that are required by the Ed Code section listed there. And then it can also review efforts by the school district to maximize bond revenues by implementing cost-saving measures. And we bolded this last item because we want to, it's a little bit of a nuanced difference, but we wanted to highlight. So it's not the CBOC engaging in in identifying, its own and cost saving measures, but the district is going to, weigh different cost saving measures of how they're going to be spending the bond funds. And then the CBOC's role in that is to review those efforts and ensure that the district is engaging in those kind of considerations. And so we wanted to just highlight that that provision for you there. And then just a reminder that the bylaws do provide a detailed description and differentiation of specific duties that are delegated to the committee, the district board, and the superintendent and their designee. And so we wanted to just provide you that citation as well. And we'll get into some of those specific examples, but we wanted to just put up these items for you on a slide to review.
I'd like to just ask a question about this provision here. I think there was a little bit of timidity or confusion on the last CBOC meeting, because I think there was just a conversation about, hey, let's have a conversation about what the strategy is going forward, why certain contracts are being signed. It was not that and this was my personal comment at the last meeting, it was not that I was trying to exert authority or say I had any authority, but it goes right to the advisory role of asking questions about the strategy. And it was kind of at that point, it seemed that all conversation was shut off because it was said, that's not your role, to determine what you're signing or not signing. And I just want to understand.
Yeah. Interrupt you right.
Okay.
We're not taking comments.
She said actually at the beginning, she was going to take comments.
That's addressed to the board here.
Okay. I think it's an important question to ask though, because I think debate is an important thing of the CBOC.
And after the presentation,
Sure.
We'll ask for some
Sounds good.
questions, and then we'll ask for the ultimate.
Sounds good. Thank you.
I mean, we'll go through our presentation. It does talk about a little bit more about the distinction of CBOC and the board duties, and then and I think hopefully some of our points will kind of get to that, but we can also address questions that more detailed and specific questions at the end after you've heard through the different pieces. So next slide, please. So we want to give some specific examples of types of duties that are outside of the CBOC's responsibilities. So the committee shall not participate in the actual bond sale or issuance process, shall not negotiate or select contractors or consultants, shall not inspect job sites without the permission of the superintendent, and shall not contact district's contractors or consultants without superintendent's permission. And the committee shall not direct staff of the district. And this is directly correlated with, our previous points of the CBOC's oversight and advisory committee role, and distinguishing it from any decision-making role of the board. And so while you retain these advisory duties and things like that, we want to make sure it's clearly separate from any powers that the board holds in actually being able to, enter into the contract, select contractors, actually, be involved in the bond sale, things like that. And so these are duties that are not the part of the CBOC's responsibilities. And then the next slide will highlight some examples of the duties of the district board and staff. And so,
and I just chime in that as all of you have graciously agreed to give up your personal time to serve on this committee, you're representing the community, with regard to the Measure G bond program. And so we really just want to avoid both, in accordance with the law, the bylaws, and, to make the best use of our Measure G bond funds, any conflicts of interest or any, impropriety, which, is usually very apparent, with those actions, in addition to the things that were listed on the previous slide.
And so we want to also highlight the specific duties of the board and district staff. And this is also actually set forth in the CBOC bylaws, section 3.4. But some of the specific responsibilities that the board would hold is to actually approve the construction contracts or construction change orders, to appropriate construction funds, to handle legal matters, approve construction plans and schedules, approve the deferred maintenance plan, and approve the sale of the bonds. And so as you kind of are sensing here, any kind of approval, decision-making, final stamp of approval, that's in the full purview and responsibility of the district board. And so we want to make sure that that is clearly distinct from the role that the CBOC is playing. And so we wanted to just remind you and highlight this distinction here. And one thing, we didn't put it up on a slide, but so this list, bulleted list was found is found in the CBOC bylaw section 3.4, but the section right after section 3.5 also gives a little bit more detail about the fact that the committee is charged with just overseeing the expenditure of bond proceeds. And so section 3.5 also reiterates that the district has not charged the committee with certain responsibilities, which include establishing priorities and order of construction for the bond projects, which that duty and responsibility and decision-making is by the board at its sole discretion. The board has not charged the committee with selecting architects, engineers, CMs, et cetera, as required to complete these projects. Approving the design for each specific project is also a role that the district has not delegated to the committee. And so we wanted to just point out both sections 3.4 and 3.5. I think they are a good place to turn to when you want to kind of distinguish the role of the board with the duties of the committee. Next slide, please. And so what that the district's master plan, which was developed and adopted by the board, that sets forth the district's initial considerations for the facilities projects that were planned for this bond, which have been incorporated into the district's Measure G bond language on the ballot. And so, and then the bond measure language thereafter sets forth the specific parameters for the rural bond program and how the bond proceeds would be spent. And so any recommendations that the CBOC makes, any oversight, any checks and balances that you're providing, it's going to have to be within these parameters that were approved by the voters. And so we want to remind you of the authority and the specific requirements set forth in the bond measure and the master plan, and that's going to be key governing documents for the CBOC in its oversight capacity for this Measure G bond. And just a few comments also related to that plan is, this was the master plan was developed by the district with, a lot of input from different stakeholders, and it was ultimately approved by the board it would guide the development and improvement of the district's facilities for the foreseeable future. And so that plan sets forth, specific projects, priorities, things like that. And as set forth in the plan, there were different, options that were presented, considered, and things like that. And so that takes into kind of consideration some of the, cost benefit analysis and the review process that the board underwent to reach this kind of this particular plan, which was incorporated into the Measure G bond. And so the district board also has authority to carry out the projects set forth in the master plan consistent with the bond measure. And so the CBOC, it doesn't have a role or authority in potentially changing these projects or priority orders as we described earlier, but it does have a duty and responsibility to continue to review and provide oversight as the district takes these steps in carrying out these projects and plans that it set forth. And then next slide, please. So this is our last slide, but as we kind of outlined, the CBOC has very specifically defined duties and permitted activities that are explicitly referenced both in the education code and the CBOC's own bylaws. And the specific language of Measure G sets forth the parameters for which the overall bond program and expenditures of the bond proceeds must comply with, and the board and district and CBOC must also all comply with those parameters as well. And so any recommendations that the CBOC makes in relation to this Measure G bond, any oversight it provides to the district related to these bond expenditures must be within these parameters that are in accordance with California law, with the CBOC bylaws, and as approved by the voters. And so reiterating, the CBOC's capacity, does not include authority to have decisions to approve or modify the actual construction projects, plan schedules, etc. We want to reiterate, the very important, crucial oversight role that you play in both keeping the district in check to make sure that they are accurately spending the funds as indicated, and then also informing the public. But we really want to make sure that we draw a clear line between the decision-making powers that the board holds. And so those were the kind of key concepts that we wanted to remind the board of. And also just provide you references in the education code and in your bylaws so that you have those resources on hand as well. Jessica, if you don't have any final comments, we could open it up for questions.
Yes, thank you, Sehi. So any questions, comments, anything you'd like us to discuss further, we're happy to do so. And I believe everyone's been provided with a copy of this presentation, or can be, that has some of the citations if necessary going forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Since this is kind of still an introductory process, just let me back into kind of a procedure first. So that was a presentation to the board, the way these process generally work, and then the board would ask any questions. And at least on an interim basis, my view is that the alternates act similar to an alternate in a jury trial. They sit there, they hear the information. I think it's appropriate to let the alternates also ask questions, and then the public is allowed to ask questions. And then I bring it back to the board for any discussion. There's no action on this item, but that's the way the process generally through. So first I will say, ask if any of the board members have any questions that they wish to ask relative to the presentation.
I had a question. I'm still a little confused about how we are communicating amongst us, which is maybe not ready for the public, let's say, to report on. So, but internal questions, if we're not allowed to reply all, or it's not recommended or something, I'm a little confused about that.
Okay, Jessica, do you want to address that question first? Did you hear that?
So in that respect, the CBOC is very similar to the governing board of the district. There are open meeting laws, and all discussions amongst a quorum of the committee, just like with the board, have to occur in public. So that's why we have regularly scheduled CBOC meetings, so that the committee can have open discussion based on its posted, published agenda. So just like with the board, there really should not be communications happening with members of the committee regarding committee business, not in an open public forum. And, that's just based on the Brown Act and California law. Because it's meant to be, we're talking about spending public monies that were given to the district by the voters. So that should happen in an open forum that's open to the public.
Jessica, let me probe that just for a second. individual members can talk with individual members about issues. Correct? Is
That is
correct?
correct. You just want to be real mindful that it doesn't become a serial meeting, and at no point are you having a quorum of the committee. And so in that respect, I think we really want to play that in the more conservative side. So when in doubt, the communication should not be happening outside of the open committee. But it doesn't necessarily mean that one committee member can't speak to another committee member if that's less than a quorum of that committee.
And the sense there is that you don't want a planned action to have been decided before the public process has occurred. But questions about procedural issues or questions about I don't understand this particular issue, or questions about whether we should visit these sites or that, those individual discussions can occur. Is that correct?
They can, but those discussions are really meant to happen, in an open public meeting setting. So if it were up to Sehi and I, there would be no outside communications, outside of the committee. Does that mean that ever happen? Probably not. If one of the committee members needs to email the chair to find out, what time was our site visit, things like that. Obviously those things can occur, but I think we really just want to be mindful about discussing or conducting committee business outside of open committee meetings.
Okay, I'm hearing there's some flexibility for discussions. And if we're uncomfortable, we should be checking in with ourselves and if necessary, checking in with you. Is that correct?
Correct. And going back to the serial meetings, I think if you look at the language that was included on that slide, that can really serve as a guide of when a communication is permissible and when it's not. And that's communications across all platforms: personal email, district email, phone calls, text messages, sitting at a coffee shop, it runs the gamut.
I have a quick question, well, actually two questions. One is, I'm assuming that from a quorum perspective, it's a quorum of the 7-person committee, and we don't count alternates and whether there's a quorum or not. And then the second question is, with the assignment of Mill Valley School emails today or tomorrow, is the expectation or is it a requirement that the committee use those email addresses in lieu of personal email addresses?
So to answer your first question, yes, the quorum is not including the alternates. And the second question, I think the idea behind giving committee members district emails is so all the committee business can be, using those emails, and it doesn't cross over with your personal email, because any document, including emails, text messages that are produced by any committee member or received, are potentially subject to the Public Records Act and can be disclosed to any member of the public. So I think it makes it cleaner, for the committee members to have separate email addresses where all committee member business is potentially conducted. So that way, if we do receive a Public Records Act request, that all of your communications are in that email address and you don't have to potentially disclose your personal emails. It's really a choice, there's no requirement or mandate for that. But it is required that if we get a public records request, let's say for all of the committee chairs, email communications related to his service on the CBOC, that, if there's emails in his personal email, those would also be subject to disclosure.
Thank you.
Hi, I have a follow-on question that takes it outside of the committee. How do we handle public requests to have a conversation individually about committee business? Because I'm sure that will happen over the next 2 years.
I think a good response to that would be our next committee meeting is on this date, and we'd love to have you attend, and we'll have a chance for public comment and questions, and can certainly discuss any committee business at committee meetings.
Any other questions from the board? Did that clarify for you?
Yes.
The alternates, questions?
Sorry, at the right time, Shine, I'll pose the question again, which is making sure that we distinguish to be in an advisory role. It's okay for committee business to ask questions of board district staff on strategy, on what process is, on how contract process is happening. And that is open, for a discussion at the CBOC. That doesn't have to do with authority to make the final decision. It has to do with actually just asking questions that the public has, and we're here to represent.
I mean, again, I think those discussions can be had at committee meetings. It certainly doesn't mean that a committee member can't reach out to the superintendent or a member of district staff if they have a question. But the business of the committee and your advisory and, should be done in the public at the committee meetings. And so these items can be agendized accordingly, for any given meeting.
Understood. I was talking about at committee meetings. It's okay to have an agenda item trying to understand, different strategy of how decisions are being made. That's the main point.
Yes, I think the committee can certainly ask questions. I think today the AECom team, might be here, and if there's questions about, priority of projects or what, it's certainly within the CBOC's role to ask questions. I think where the distinction is the CBOC isn't taking action, regarding that project priority list or who the district will or will not enter into a contract with. But in terms of, process and why are things happening, I think the district encourages members of the public to participate in this process, including the CBOC.
Your point, when you're going through the presentation, I didn't think was completely accurate, is that when Measure G was passed, that it passed the specific priority list and master plan. The bond that was actually approved gave a lot of authority to the district to change. So I would just, there was a legal presentation. I'm just asking a question if you could clarify that the Measure G actually locked in a priority list or not, because that was one of the slides here.
So I don't think it says necessarily about the like what projects go in what order, but the bond measure language sets, the four corners of how the bond funds can be spent, because that's what the voters approved. So in other words, if we say we're doing HVAC facilities upgrades with our bond measure, and that's like what we're going to use the money for, we can't then turn around and build a brand new football stadium. So we just want to make sure that we keep whatever our project list is within the parameters of what the bond measure is, because that's what the voters approved.
Other questions? Okay, I'll turn it to the public for any questions.
Hey, good morning. First of all, thank you so much for being partners with us along this journey. As I'm Michelle Sursich, School Board Trustee President, and I have learned that the Brown Act does include some specific ways of doing business. So Jessica, I wonder if it's identical, if the Brown Act and the Ed Code that I refer to all the time does govern this body. And by example, we have, when the public comes, they not only ask questions, but they can provide feedback. There's so many minutes in our Ed Code law that we are to cover. We have a handbook and we have local control and ability to modify that. So I just wonder if this body needs to create some understandings of how the public's going to involve themselves here. And then also, I do understand we don't have a Zoom link for the public today, which is part of our board's policy in providing our public here in Mill Valley local control access. So I'm wondering, Jessica, if you can speak to that as well. Again, can this board modify these ways of addressing the Brown Act, or should they comply with our manner of doing business on the board to be consistent?
So thank you, President Hodge. Nice to see you. So the CBOC, as far as the Brown Act goes, does generally comply with the same laws that the board would. There aren't specific board policies per se for the CBOC committee like the board has. And there are some, intricacies, let's say, with the regularly scheduled board meetings. And the CBOC is really governed by, the specific education code section and the bylaws. But certainly in the agenda, the CBOC committee can agendize, a public forum where public comments and questions and things like that can be presented to the committee, because it is meant to be an open meeting that's transparent for the public to not only, attend, but interact with. And then as far as whether or not the committee is, available, like if it's an in-person committee or available by Zoom, I think that's something, we defer to district staff on, and that's, there's no specific requirement for the CBOC that it, be available by Zoom link, or if it's an in-person meeting. So that's I think a district decision to determine that.
Can I chime in? So I'm Michelle Rollins. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Business Services. This agenda was posted without a Zoom link. And therefore, when the request was made to have a Zoom link added, it was within the 72 hours of posting. So it was provided to the CBOC as an in-person meeting. And therefore, unless the agenda, and Jessica, you can clarify the legal law, but unless the agenda was posted within 72 hours with the Zoom link included, having it be available to all public, then we could not make that modification or accommodate that request that was made yesterday morning, given the parameters of complying with the Brown Act.
That's absolutely correct.
So thank you for the question. I would note that section 6.3 of the bylaws grants the committee the right to adopt procedures for operation. So I think it would be appropriate, this committee, to have as a subsequent agenda item adoption of procedures, so everybody's clear. I recognize that there is a limit on the public time for board meeting purposes and so forth. So there's a lot we should look at. I think this is a good, healthy discussion, and I suggest we move on at this point in the interest of time, unless there are any other public comments in that a subsequent agenda item be looking at procedures going forward. Other questions or comments from the public? Okay, I'll bring it back here. In light of all this discussion, any other suggestions other than my suggestion that we adopt a procedures approach?
Just my own clarification. So the next CBOC meeting, I believe, is June 15th, at least as it's scheduled today. Should we agree now that there'll be a Zoom link for that meeting, or instead are we going to discuss a Zoom link at that meeting and then push the Zoom link back up? Because I do feel like it's important for the community to have access. And so if we can decide today, if permissible, to have a Zoom link put into the agenda for June 15th, that might be a good thing.
I think that would be, so setting aside having not adopted a procedure, I'm going to interpret that as a motion that we adopt a procedure on an interim basis, at least at the next meeting, be a Zoom linked meeting.
Correct. So
Second.
All right. I'm not going to do roll call. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? I myself. Any opposed? Okay, so we adopted that process. Let's now move on to the, thank you, Jessica, Suhi. Appreciate your time, and I understand you're going to stay and listen to the rest of the discussion. Measure G. Yeah, Measure G updates. I think Michelle, were you going to introduce that item, or am I asking Brett to come forward? And
I can introduce that item. My name is Julio Arroyo with the school district. I'm over safety operations and maintenance, and today we're here are a comm team, and Sandrine Hitchcock will introduce the team as well as go over the firm's role in our bond program as well as priority list and really the next steps in their scope and include as well as I see Brett here, as well as Brett is here and they will introduce their team.
Good morning. Should I approach or just work from here?
What, this works for me. You're not addressing any of the slides.
Okay. Well, I'm Brett Mitchell. I'm with AECOM. We are thrilled to be here. We think you made the right choice. And so thank you for that. Thank the board for selecting this. We do program, project, construction management in a lot of places. And so we have a lot of deep support for your day-to-day team, which I'm very proud to introduce to you. A lot of years of experience here in school districts. They're going to represent you day-to-day, starting with Sandrine, who's a licensed architect and has done California schools for a long time. She'll talk a little bit more in just a minute about the things she's going to be doing right away. Also, we have Sasha as a construction manager. He's been delivering successfully construction projects for us right across the bridge in San Francisco Unified for some time now. So we're very lucky to have him here. Glad to bring him in. And then Bryson as our project engineer, really one of our best young up and coming project engineers. We're glad to have him here. But I really want you to know that AECOM has a lot of support. There's a lot of safety nets, on a day-to-day that we have a lot of reach back services where they need it, whether it's estimating, scheduling, those types of things. My job here is really to support them and to just, to really add an exclamation to the point that, we are here to support this team. I have our regional vice president here, Keith Kajia, and you want to say anything, Keith?
No, just thrilled that we're here and exciting for this committee to be formed. We're involved in a lot of work in California on the education space and a very important role to have this oversight. So commend the district for the organization that you've had to explain the Brown Act. But thrilled to be here today.
Yeah. So I don't know, Sandrine, do you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing right away and then?
Sure. So happy to meet you all. So my role on the team is going to be program management, essentially overseeing the overall bond projects and working with our team on scheduling, estimating, selecting consultants for the team and for the district. What we've been doing over the last 3 weeks, really, when we started, is really looking into the master plan and validating the scope and the budget. So we're in the process of doing this. We're also looking into other funding opportunities with the states. We are working on selecting with the district an architect and an engineering team, which will remind me, it's in June.
24. I'll come back to the board in June, yes.
Right. And we're looking also at engaging a community outreach consultant and a communication consultant. So a lot of things moving right now, but we're really trying to set everything in place so that we can move forward with a concrete and agreeable plan for everyone.
Great. We engage in strategy discussions all the time amongst us on how we can make sure your bond dollars, we manage bond projects all over the state. And so we're all constantly engaged in how we can be more efficient for you, help you become more efficient with your bond dollars. Even as I think Sandrine's being a little timid, our authority having jurisdiction is the Department of State Architect, DSA. And so even in strategic conversations, she has tremendous amount of experience. She has the bat phone at DSA. And so I think that's going to help us a lot, as we go forward with approvals. So really excited to be here.
Thank you.
That's it.
So we've all thank you. We've received your packet, and I don't think we'll go through that slides unless there's a sense that anyone needs that, and I'd rather get to questions immediately. I have the first question: who's going to be at our meetings, and who's our point person?
The point person will be me on a daily basis.
Okay.
And Sasha will be eventually also upon contact, mostly during construction. But he'll be involved throughout the process. Bryson also is a point of contact, but the main point is me and obviously Brett in case as needed.
Okay. And can you say a little bit more about your timelines and what you're thinking? So what can we expect to have occurred by our next meeting so we'll have a sense of what we can evaluate?
Sure. So by the next meeting, actually, that's what we were mentioning earlier, we should have an architect selected or architects selected. Over the next few months, we're going to look obviously into funding. As I mentioned, we're going to look at priority 1 scopes and then start talking about options for delivery methods for all the projects, especially the middle school. But again, I think it's like all those pieces moving right now, but I think within the next 3 months, we should have a good understanding of where we're going.
And how do you work in connection with the school board or district staff in reaching those issues?
Sure. So the main point of contact at the district for us is Julio. So everything we discuss is through him. And then Julio communicates internally.
And just to add on, and so we're gonna be going to the school board, giving monthly updates, talking about where we're at in different steps of the process as well. And so we're also meeting, at least weekly, if not multiple times, as we're getting going and ramping things up. And so it would be similar to coming back to the CBOC as well as giving updates on those timeframes of where we're at and where we expect to be in the next couple of months.
And to the extent you're communicating with the board, is it anticipated that you would include the oversight committee as CCs on guidelines, scheduling, whatever? What's your thought?
Well, generally, we're coming to the board. We're going to be coming monthly through the board meeting, and then Dr. Berman may communicate separately through communication, but
I'm just looking at Anna Russell. I'm thinking that we could add all of our CBOC members to the board agendas. And that way they'll receive the agenda, the links and the updates. And then you're always welcome to come to our board meetings, but that way they're fully looped into all of our communications. And we can also add them to our Wednesday communications as well that go out to the school. So most of you already received that if you have children in the district, but we'll just ensure that the CBOC listserv will be added to the agendas for the regular board meetings, as well as the school community communications.
And that would occur through our Mill Valley Schools website.
Through your BSD emails.
Other questions?
I'm just looking through the Measure G update side. Was the architect RFP was issued on March 10th?
yes.
Okay. And then one other question I have is on I'm looking at the slide that has sort of the priority 1 improvements by school, and I'm just looking at Old Mill because that's where my kids are and so what I'm familiar with. Have some of these priority 1 projects already happened or they're already in process? Like I know we've been talking about a new playground structure for this summer to be built this summer at Old Mill. So is that coming out of the Measure G fund or is that coming from a different?
That's coming out of our routine maintenance fund, so
Okay.
that is not part of this project, but none of these projects have happened yet.
So is there so there may be 2 different sort of playground improvement projects happening at Old Mill?
Yeah,
Okay,
yes,
thank
because
you.
we have multiple playgrounds there, and so really, like Sandrine was saying, is we're gonna in the next few weeks, we're gonna really see what's going through everything, double checking estimates to see kind of what's gonna be able to be kept.
Thank you.
So then on June 15th, what we should expect is an update to this documentation with a clear perspective on these are the P1 priorities that we would like to proceed with some cost estimation, because I think from a public standpoint, people are very vested right now in understanding, particularly at the middle school level, what is happening and when are we going to start seeing plans. Now, we understand architects are still have to be hired, plans still have to be, developed, but I think from a public standpoint, having a much clearer record within the next 3 months over, this is what we believe the priorities should be with an estimation of where we think, cost envelope would be. Is that something we should be expecting?
And I'll start. It's gonna take probably a little bit longer than that, because what needs to happen is we need to come up with a agreement to how we're gonna move forward in terms of the construction method. And so depending on the construction method, and then once we bring in the architect, really that's when we'll be able to really fine tune some of the estimates. And so most likely that will be past that June 15th board, but we're working towards that to come up with what's gonna be the best method and making those recommendations.
And if I may, I think there's two things, right? There's the middle school and there's the monetization portion. So I think we're looking at two different things, really. And yes, the intent is to move into that direction, but it might take a little more time to really define what the scopes and priorities really are and update that the estimates, like Julio was saying. And also, aside from the architect, who's going to be a really important part in defining that scope and schedule, selecting the contractors or contractor will influence also, have that third set of eyes from their perspective, kind of confirming, validating scope, timeline, and budgets too. So a lot of entities that need to get to a point where we're all in agreement on the path forward. So hopefully we'll have an update in June, but it might take a little longer.
September meeting.
Other questions?
But at least in June, there may be like a pre-priority list without the numbers, kind of like, okay.
Yeah, I guess I would ask another question, and that is, as between the middle school and the other schools, how are you balancing those priorities?
I think number one,
I realize that's a board issue, but but you're addressing that issue.
That's a really good question. Thank you for asking. I think the bond is obviously heavy on the middle school funding, right? So we're looking at that in more details. I can't really tell you right now because we're really just started, but when we're looking at both the middle school and the monetizations and try to understand how we're going to fit and prioritize them to make it happen. But I think it's a little early to.
Yeah, so you've got several balls in the air that you need to figure out.
And we, if I may add to what you said, we're in these bond management, we're very process driven. And oftentimes when it's important to develop an interest in an initiative, we have to approach it from a very conceptual process. So that's what your I can't remember the architect that developed the initial budget you saw as part of Measure G. It was a conceptual budget, which motivated us to the point we passed Measure G, and now it's really incumbent upon us to get deep into the weeds of what does it really mean. And so we're really starting that process now of facilities conditions assessments. What does each classroom really look like? And so when we're done, we should have a very comprehensive budget validation of what was initially. And so it's we're anxious too. It's just going to take us a little time to get through all of that process of deep works.
And I should comment that last time around, there was that same anxiousness because we were dealing with building Edna and improving the other schools. So I guess I caution us all to, we want to have an answer yesterday or next week or by the next meeting. It's going to take longer, but we're going to keep asking the questions. I appreciate that you said thank you for the question. I'm sure that wasn't the case. But
I think we're, as long as we have target timelines, right? I mean. Publicly, we don't want this to drift into, nobody wants to see this drift into next December, right? And so I think. Obviously, you're working very closely with all of your constituents, the board, to make all of these decisions. There's a lot that has to be put together. I think we just want to make sure we have. Some level of expectation publicly on when people can expect to see. And if that's 6 months, then, you know, let's communicate that so that people have that.
Although we're missing the whole summer time, right, when school is off, so it would be perfect to maybe knock out a few things, I don't know, just. Of course, it is a greater concept, but it would be a nice message to the public too, that it's starting and.
And I think some of those that Julia is saying are, there are improvements happening at the sites this summer, just not out of this fund, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it really goes back to what Sandrine was saying, is that really the bond, a lot of the focal point is going to be in the middle school. So really getting to the process, doing a lot of initial work, and then coming to an understanding of the middle school project will then help us really develop the other ones versus trying to do something small and we're using funds and we really don't know how much we're going to need yet at the middle school.
Question, as part of the initial like scope of the conceptual plan, especially in middle school, AECOM has a lot of experience with CEQA and permitting. Are you kind of looking at any fatal flaws with timeline or just getting approvals for the different scope of projects?
We're definitely looking through all the agencies and all the processes we're gonna have to go through. That's part of the master schedule and understanding what the scope is really gonna be like. Yes, CEQA, DSA, OPSC, DTSC, I'll spare you the whole list, but yes, whatever will be needed for that project, we're keeping track of.
All right, any other questions?
I just have one final question. There was I was trying to find it in my email, but did you say, I thought you had said at one point recently that we would break ground like month and year, and maybe the kids would be in the school month and, like, did you come up with some kind of, is there some kind of general timeline or no, not yet?
I think until they determine the build method and bring on the architect, that will all be aligned.
Okay.
The other thing I just wanted to mention with the priority one projects is you can see, for example, we already did the shade structures. And we did that out of what's called a capital outlay fund. In addition, I know that Julio and his team are planning to put in the bottle fillers. And then again, as mentioned, some of the playground work that is done, but there are, you know, different phases to each of those, or I should say, more comprehensive upgrades that will come out of bond funds.
On that point, how does AECOM look across the whole portfolio of funds and projects so that we're prioritizing things with your not Measure G funds to like take stuff off the list that lets us get farther down into Measure G only opportunities here? How does that different pools of capital work and interact together?
I think it goes, and I'll start first, but I think it really goes back to where we end up with the middle school, because that's going to really give us an idea of with the bond funds, how much is going to be available for the other sites, and then to be able to kind of look then through the list that kind of prioritize to see what's going to be the best path forward, and especially with the sites and getting keep that.
And some of the smaller projects just to add are routine repair maintenance. So for example, the playground, I know that Julio had an assessment done where we sort of have a 3 to 5 year plan of replacements versus upgrades. So those are some of the smaller items that come out of the general fund routine repair and maintenance budget.
Okay, questions? Thank you. I know we probably could sit here and ask many more questions, but we're short on time. So let's move on. Brett and Keith, thank you for being here. I've understood that you needed to take off, so I appreciate you being here.
Okay, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Okay, the next item is update on bond issuance, and Michelle is that presentation going to occur from Greg? Is Greg on? I think I see Greg on.
Greg,
I am on
your mute.
with spotty cell coverage. I am on.
Great, I'm just gonna introduce you. This is Greg Isom from Isom and Advisors. He is the district's financial advisor specifically for general obligation bonds. Greg, everyone has the presentation. It was posted to the agenda and it is being controlled by Anna. So if you just let us know when you want to proceed.
I'm ready to proceed. What do you want me to? Do you want me to go through it, or do you want me to just hit the one page, or? Michelle,
I don't know that.
Sorry.
Yeah, how long? Go ahead, go ahead.
I was just gonna say what we could probably do is just go to the second to last page where it has the latest update. Do you want to go through that one, next one, or go backwards? Back one more.
You're talking about original plan?
Yeah.
Updated plan.
There we go. That one right there. So this is, yes.
Okay. Could you go 2 slides back and just quickly give us a little bit of context and then go to where we are?
Sure. Okay. So this page right here where it has all these different options, this is what took place over like the last, I want to say 3 to 4 years of presentations to the board and presentations to the CFAC committee, which was, okay, this was when the district was originally talking about doing a bond. Well, you know, how much could they generate? And I presented some options, and then it said, well, what if we want it to look like this? Okay, well, here's this option. Well, what if we wanted it to look like this? Okay, well, here's this new option. And so it kind of just morphed into, as you can see, those 5 options. And so the option at the end was kind of the final but preliminary plan where we said, okay, well, this is what the bond amount's going to be. And this is a way to get to the 194 million. And the reason I say the preliminary final plan is when you go to the voters, you generally, have to come up with something that shows how you're going to get to 194 in a reasonable, cost efficient way to the taxpayers. With that being said, though, things change all the time because the tax base changes, interest rate changes, and ideas from board members change, or admin or community members say, hey, well, what if we made it look like this? So in essence, it's a moving 194 million, and the goal is to get to the most cost efficient way. So that's this page right here. This was like 3 to 4 years of options and decision making, and they kind of landed on, well, let's choose option 4, which is the most amount of money for the district. And the thinking was, this will give us money to build the new middle school, as well as this will give us money to kind of do some other projects at some of the other elementary sites.
Okay, so that set the total bond amount, basically.
Yes, correct.
All right. So why don't you jump from there to the current updated plan?
Perfect. Okay, so move forward, that page right there. So at the last CFAC meeting, it was discussing, hey, now that we have a little bit more concrete plans, we have a better idea of timing when it comes to some of the stuff. Greg, we need $150 million by 2027 in order for us to build the middle school or do the middle school project, I should say. So I said, all right, well, let me come up with some extra options for you guys, because I'm just clearly the king of options. And so I came up with option 2A1, option 2B1, and then option 2B2. And the reason why was, as you can see, in the bond sales of 2022, 2024, 2027, what I'm doing is I'm accessing at least $150 million for the district to complete that project. And then option 2A1 gives you some sprinkle money to do some other projects. When it comes to the timing of it, that's up to the district. Option 2B1 You can see there's a smaller upfront chunk, but you get more money by 2027. And then the option 2B2 was, what if I just got you 150 million exactly by 2027? What could that potentially look like? And so there's all these variables in regards to, you know, total payback, types of bonds that are used. And so, you know, this is kind of where I believe the district is right now. And they're probably going to decide between one of these three options from my presentation that I did to the school board 2 weeks ago.
Thank you. I know that presentation was on the website, so hopefully everybody had a chance to see it. Just a question in terms of the bond that was passed. It sets $194 million. Are there other limitations within that bond relating to tax rate or
Great question.
anything else?
So what voters approve when they go to the, the district puts a bond before voters. Voters approved the bond amount not to exceed 194 million. Voters approve a tax rate of not to exceed $30. And voters approve the detailed project list. Those are the three things that the voters say, this is what I'm giving you, the school district, the authority to follow. When it comes to the timing of the sales, the amount of the sales, the priority of the projects, that wasn't the voters deciding that now that turns to the administration and the school board to make those decisions.
Okay, so it looks like you're pushing the upper limit on the tax rate, but we're still at 194 million. Is that correct?
Correct. So the voters approved in the tax rate statement that was in the voter guide. It had a maximum tax rate of $30 per 100,000 of assessed value. And then below that, there's a paragraph that says, well, what do you think like the average tax rate is going to be? And at that point, the average tax rate was going to be about $26. But the $30 tax is going to be the maximum for probably the first, 15, 20 years of the bond program. And then it generally tapers off on those later years.
Okay. And am I guessing correctly that this is all in flux still, that it won't be resolved until at least the first issuance is approved?
Yeah, I mean, all these numbers, change weekly. If I ran the analysis today, the interest cost would be, less by 10 basis points because of, what's been happening with the economy, right? And so while the bond authorization amounts would probably stay the same, the total interest costs would be lower and the average tax rate would be lower. But for the most part, yeah, until the district sells a bond, I can just keep creating options left and right. But nothing is gonna be a concrete until something is sold, to where then the debt service is set and the tax rate is set and the interest rate is set. So
can you tell me what the differential between the interest rate that was set when the bond was issued, that was assumed when the bond was issued, versus what that interest rate is today?
So when we played around with the numbers, we were assuming an all-in interest rate of about 4%. At the time when the district was looking, was doing the bond election, the rates were in the 3s. Then rates, late last fall got into high 4s. They've since come down, and as you said, I can only base this off of another AAA school district bond that just sold 2 weeks ago that I did for Kenwood up in Sonoma County, and it sold for 3.99%, all in interest rate. Judging that Mill Valley has the double AAA, judging that Mill Valley is selling bigger block sizes and that interest rates have gone down, I would assume that Mill Valley's interest rate would be 3.6 to maybe 3.8.
That's the question.
If you were to do it right now.
We'll get through. Okay, well, we're not gonna ask you to anticipate where the feds go.
Yeah.
Thank you for not asking me where rates are gonna go, because you know, your guess is as good as mine.
And so you're responsible for one of the balls in the air that will affect AECom's work. And then I assume another ball in the air is what's happened with construction costs and all that.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, generally, I mean, you know, I don't really, you know, work with AECom, you know, generally AECom will probably ask the district, hey, when can we sell our next series of bonds? And then I'll run an analysis and say, okay, well, this is what I'm anticipating. You can sell at this time frame, you know, because every year with the change of assessed valuation to the school district, right? So many things change and interest rates change. I generally give a annual update in early fall when we get the updated tax base from the county. And then I kind of just give an updated plan of finance. This is where we are. You already sold X. And in order to, you know, achieve the next 194, this is what the plan looks like.
So another factor.
Oh, sorry, go.
So another factor then is what's happening on the assessed valuation, correct?
Yeah, the assessed valuation and interest rate dictate more than anything else because, you know, I mean, in the perfect world, you could get all, you know, if your tax base grows by 9% or 10% 1 year, as opposed to, let's say, 5%. Well, we just jumped, you know, we just went ahead an additional year than what we were anticipating, you know, so then if your tax base grows 2 straight years at 8%, as opposed to the 5% that we're projecting, well, then that'll change your bond program. It'll move everything up a year.
Okay. Does that complete your presentation?
That completes, yeah, my presentation.
Okay, then I'm sorry I've been dominating the questions. I open it to the rest of the committee.
Sure.
I'm sorry, Chris. So since part of our charge is to communicate with the public on what's happening with the bond, I think there's been a lot of I know at the board meeting last week, board members had concerns about the plan, and I know that there were some discussions at some PTA meetings, and I think that we have an obligation to kind of come out with one sort of statement about here's what's happening with Measure G, here's the schedule of the bonds. You know, I think that one thing that I really respect about the process is that CPAC has been involved with it for several years at this point. And so I think there's just a lot of confusion in the community, and I would love for, I don't know if it comes from CBOC or from the board or from the district office, but I'd really love to see a way that we can have sort of some sort of statement out there that just clarifies what's happening, what the concerns are, where there are not concerns. I think there's just been a lot of confusion and angst in the community.
No, and I think you're right. I think, you know, sometimes what happens during campaigns, what's said during a campaign to make something win, sometimes isn't, you know, what all the details show. You know, like there's campaigns and then there's facts, right? And I think in regards to what was presented to the board for them to approve the $195 million was a plan to get to $194 million, right? You know, but with every school district in California, you know, things change and priorities change and timing change, where someone says, hey, we actually need all this money by 2027. We need this money. So, okay, so what's the plan? Okay, well, here's the new revised plan. And so I think some of the confusion was some people maybe not grasping the concept that plans can be revised. And I agree with you. I think it'd be really important that once, you know, the plan where we're saying, okay, we know that we need this money by this amount of time, and I'm sure AECom would probably, you know, inform the district, hey, yes, we need X amount of money by this amount of time, and this plan works to get our middle school and get the remaining some sprinkle projects done. I think that's the message that gets out is, hey guys, we've looked at the plan. The plan is a sound, financial, prudent plan. It's going to get us the funds that we need for the schools. Let's go.
And I think reminding people that what was in the voters guide was what the voters voted on was not to exceed 194 million and not to exceed a tax rate of $30 per 100,000. And there's no, we will be within that. There's no ability to go beyond that. So I just want to Say for the record, we're staying within what the voters voted on.
Yeah.
There
and-
was
and
no
some-
misinformation provided to the voters.
Yeah, you're spot on. And some of the confusion as well has to do with the 75 word ballot language, because there was this new law that was put in like 4 years ago. The city had to include a bunch of language from the tax rate statement, but it didn't actually say what the language is supposed to say. So everyone's going, are we supposed to say the highest tax rate? Are we supposed to say the average tax rate? And so then some people will glob onto, well, the average says 26, as opposed to, well, the tax rate statement actually says 30. And so an average is I mean, the tax rate's going to change every single year, and the district is going to have no control over what, the tax rate does. Like, right? Because if the tax base grows at 5.2% as opposed to 5%, well, guess what? That tax rate's going to move up just a little bit, But I think, I didn't know what your name is, but whatever, you're spot on with what you said, which is $194 million, max tax rate of $30. And that's what we're going to deliver.
And maybe I missed it. When is the board making a decision about these options? Where they expect to make a decision?
The question is a timeline on board decision.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that. Michelle, can you?
I'll just say that this presentation went to the board on March 9th with this updated slide. So it's at the board's discretion to move ahead with next steps.
Okay.
But there is not a date that I'm aware of.
So, and can I just clarify, if you choose option B, are you locked into the fact that in 24, you're gonna do X and gonna do Y, or you're gonna keep evaluating it at each point? Like, we're gonna get 50 million in 2 years, so they're definitely sure to be able to cut ground on the middle school, for example. Would the next round of sales be committed, or you would continue to reevaluate the economic environment?
Greg, I'll let you respond to that, but I just want to jump in and say that with the last bubble that I was here with the district on, we had anticipated needing potentially greater than 3 series, but we benefited from low interest rates as well as higher assessed valuation than anticipated historically. So we were able to get the job done, meaning that we were able to, rather than 4 series, we were able to sell it in 2 or 3 series. And so that benefits the district in terms of cost of sales and some of the other soft costs involved with each series of a sale. So Greg, but maybe if you could talk about this particular series, it wouldn't lock us in, like we could adjust accordingly.
No, and I think that, as I said, that's where there's confusion with how bonds work sometimes, which is you start with a plan, you try to implement a plan, and you update that plan when things change, right? And so, I mean, already, we were looking at 5 sales, Michelle, and now we're down to 4 sales because your tax base kind of overperformed what we originally thought it was going to do, right? And so now, let's say you choose option 2A1, 194, and you're going to sell 54.5 million. You choose that you do not have to follow, or the district does not have to follow the 2024, 2027, 29 plan. This is like, they could easily say, we don't need 52 million in 2024. We only need 40 million, but let's get the remainder in 2027. I mean, the district does not
stop credit, basically. I mean, yeah, it's so. Okay, because my other question is, I think that the people at Silicon Valley Bank, a year ago thought they were doing a pretty good thing by investing in bonds. And so if I understand all the news that over the last 10 days, they didn't act quickly enough when things were changing. So I guess I'm wondering how that, if we anticipate that there's going to be a lot more interest rate hikes over the next year than we've seen in the last 20 years, for example, how do you anticipate the projects, dealing with that situation?
Yeah, no, so that's a great question. So if rates, so there was just the rate hike, what was it, yesterday or the day before? And, but the market had already planned on that rate hike taking place, right? So the Fed announces the rates are going up, and yet nothing really changed in the market. There was a 5 basis point increase in 1 year. The rest of it stayed exactly the same. Normally when there's drama, like there was the Silicon Valley Bank or Credit Suisse First Boston, that's actually good for school districts looking to sell their bonds, because it actually, turns in people don't want to put their money into, stock market, and it drives the bond market down in regards to issuers selling, right? Whether Silicon Valley holds on to their bonds is a whole nother story, right? But for Mill Valley, bad economy is actually generally really good for selling bonds. If rates were, let's say rates did go up 100 basis points, yeah, that would have an effect on that last sale of bonds, the one in 2029. And so the reason why, as I said, meeting with CFAC and what the district has been talking about, I think it's a prudent plan right now to ensure that, hey, the priority middle school, 150 million, and I think it's set up this way, even anticipating an interest rate increase. But to me, my opinion would be, if I was at the board meeting right now and say, hey, with everything that's going on and rates are going down, let's lock in some of the low rates now, so we can, eliminate a fourth of this 194 million with a lower than, below average interest rates.
Just interject one other option. I just want to make sure that everyone understands that this does vary. And Greg, I know that early on, it was pre-COVID, we actually refinanced some of the bonds to save taxpayers money. So similar to a mortgage, and I know I'm oversimplifying it, we were able to take some of a series of bonds that were at a higher interest rate, refinance them, and then save taxpayers money. So I will just say that we need to be flexible on what this modeling looks like and how it can be modeled differently, given the outlook and project list and estimated costs.
Okay, thank you. I know we could keep asking questions of Greg, but in the interest of time, any comment from the public? All right, back to the board. Jessica, your comment about kind of having an integrated communication strategy seems like something that to me makes sense, and I want to get the sense of the board if we want to take steps before the next meeting to move forward, make that kind of connection.
So Roger, I mean, that makes complete sense to me. I guess the question I have is what's the deliverable and how we're going to get there? I mean, because my sense is there's been misinformation, disinformation around this topic over the recent time period. So I agree that we should speak with one voice, but what's the plan to get there, and how do we get there? That was in the details.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how to do that. We could have a subcommittee of some sort that focused on being available for those kind of discussions, rather than have one person designate. I'm open, but I think we should step forward to make sure there's some communication. Agreed. Any suggestions?
I don't actually have any concerns. I understand you have heard concerns from the community or so, but the rules are pretty clear. So if we can just take the decision which was made and communicate that should be, just we will not go over XYZ. That's it, done.
Okay, well, in the absence of kind of anything better, let me suggest as the interim chair and carry over to the ultimate chair, being designated for purposes of communicating with the board, since as I referred to earlier, I think the communications issue was reserved to discuss with the board under the bylaws. So rather than us going out, at least have some discussions. And I would be willing to see
on the district website, there is a whole series of FAQs kind of, that are out there covering most topics. So I would think that's something to look at and assess ongoing accuracy given the updates and how things naturally change. That might be a good place to start, is to use
the information that's already available in the community and double check that versus, creating something new when we've got something that's already existed, perhaps.
I'm not suggesting a vehicle. I'm just acknowledging that the bylaws to me has an ambiguity that says that communications plans are reserved for the board. So I want to make sure that we're consistent with the bylaws. So is that an acceptable way to proceed? We'll see your final. Okay. All right, let's move on to next. Let's see, that's right. Let's move on to the next item. I would like to actually, this is committee business. I would like to, in making sure we have time to cover it, move item D2 to first, that is dealing with Form 700, rather than deal with the election at this point. So can we have, let's see, who is addressing?
I believe it's Sehi, and just because we are Brown Act, just to formalize, I would recommend someone make a motion to affirm that change in the agenda and then a second.
All right, that's fine. I have a motion to change.
So moved.
Second. Second. Okay, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you, Michelle.
And Sehi, I understand Jessica had to take another meeting, but if we are on to agenda item, statement of interest, Form 700.
Yeah, she had to hop off for a call, but I am here for any questions.
So Sehi, can you very briefly describe what the Form 700 is and what's required and when it must be filed?
Yes, and sorry, I'm having some glitches with my computer. Hopefully I'm communicating across to you guys okay. So Form 700 is like, it's a statement of economic interest. And so it is required by generally public officials to file annually and to disclose certain information. Typically, the disclosure categories would be dependent on the type of position that you hold with your respective agency, and those are usually outlined in that agency's conflict of interest code. The authority for and requirement for your CBOC to file the Form 700s lies within your own bylaws, and so the bylaws set forth a specific requirement that in section 5.3 that ultimately for members of the committee, by accepting appointment to this committee, all members of the committee are agreeing to comply with certain conflict of interest rules set forth in Government Code Section 1090, along with the Political Reform Act and Government Code Section 81,000, and to complete the Form 700 as would be required by other designated employees of the district. And so that's where the authority comes. And so the filing requirements are fairly straightforward. And so you would be given a form and any necessary schedules that would meet your disclosure category, and then and the district staff would handle any of the administrative procedures on your behalf, but the CBOC members would need to make sure that they complete that pursuant to the bylaws.
So Sehi, one question, clearly it's in the bylaws, and then looking at bylaws from half a dozen other CBOCs, it's in their bylaws. But I guess my question, and notwithstanding it's in the bylaws, is it a legal requirement that the Form 700 attach to CBOC members, or is this a choice that was made by the board for this CBOC? I'm just trying to understand the legal requirement, if there is one, that says that CBOC members need to complete the Form 700, because it seems to have varied over time. And my understanding is that the prior CBOC in Mill Valley did not have to complete a Form 700. So I'm just questioning the basis for the inclusion in the bylaws.
Yeah, so there is no express statutory requirement that identifies the CBOC as being subject to the Form 700. And I think that's why you kind of potentially see district CBOC bylaws. Some may expressly include in the bylaws, like there's here, others may choose not to. And so there's no statutory requirement. And so it was included here for this district. I think, some possible considerations might be because even though there's no statutory requirement, the committee obviously is providing oversight over bond funds and important fiscal decisions. And so that might be kind of the thought process as to why a lot of districts may still include this requirement of their CBOC members, but there's no express statutory authority that identifies CBOCs as being subject to the Form 700.
Okay, thank you. And I read in one of the notations that the form is due to be filed 1 week from today by March 30th. So that's the deadline for completing what appears to be an incredibly onerous and complicated form.
It has to be mailed by April 3rd.
Yeah, I think I heard someone say the filing of the annual reporting deadline with the FPPC is April 3rd. I think the March 30th deadline on the agenda might be an internal deadline, if I'm not mistaken, just to aid the staff in making the filings.
And then are those forms subject to to a public records request?
Yeah, yes, they could be disclosed under a Public Records Act request.
Okay, I raised that to make sure everyone is aware of the form. My spouse, being a public official, we've been filing it for many, many years. It's hard the first time, it's easier the subsequent times, depending upon how your financial condition changes. But I'm just looking to see, as everybody read through and aware of the situation. Okay.
No, I have not, but I will.
Okay.
Does the CFAC file the Form 700?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, that was for purposes of making sure everyone is aware of the detail involved. And if there are questions on that, Michelle, who can they address those questions to?
Anna, do you want to, Anna's usually our point person, and then we can work with legal if there are any questions.
Okay. All right.
So Anna is our executive assistant to the superintendent and board. And so all Form 700 lives with Anna.
Okay. Thank you. That completes that particular item. Let's go back then to the election of chairperson and vice chairperson. I believe the bylaws indicated that the initial chair was to be designated by the district, and that's how I'm taking its capacity. But under our bylaws, I'm to select somebody to be a chairperson. The vice chairperson acts in that capacity in the absence of the chairperson. I'm looking for motions to nominate individually the chairperson.
I'd like to move to nominate John Moriarty for the chair.
Yeah, I'll just say, Roger, with the Form 700, I'm not in a position to complete that, so I will be stepping down from
Do you have an alternate?
I'm sorry, I spent a lot of time yesterday, and it's not something that I'm able or willing to do.
I understand, and I appreciate that.
Another question. So the responsibilities of the chairperson and the vice chairperson, do we have like a job description or something what that would entail? I asked about it a few months ago, but I've not heard back, and they only I know it was introduced, but then you were mentioning it's actually way more work than it was presented. So I would like to have a little bit of understanding.
Well, I can give you some background then.
Yeah.
Before we go through that. In some sense, it's not a lot of work. But in reality, it can be a lot. If that makes sense. So you do need to keep your eyes on the ground and what's happening. And check in with the other members to see if there are issues that they're interested in. So preparing the agenda, working with the district and the board as required to address issues, put the agenda together, make sure that AECom is available and responding timely to issues, and same for any other contractors. And then running the board meeting. Probably the most challenging, time consuming is the annual report that needs to be done. If you can wrestle the other members to join you, that's great. I don't think I was always that successful in wrestling other members, so I know in each instance I prepared the initial draft, and that took some time. But the reports are sometimes, as you get through the projects and the years, they're smaller and smaller. And the final report really was just kind of a large two-sided postcard. And the first report had much more information. And if there are issues that come up, problems, then it'll take more and more time. So that's pretty much it. I don't think I've left anything out. It's not a surprise. I think to you.
Would it be okay if I briefly chimed in on that chair definition and duties?
Yes, that would be great. I appreciate it.
I just wanted to just remind the committee members, so in section 9 of your bylaws, it identifies the officers. And so just to point out the duties of the chair as set forth in the bylaws, we want to just account for, the duty to preside at all of the meetings of the committee. And the chair also may sign letters, reports, or other communications on behalf of the committee, and serves as a spokesperson and representative to the board on behalf of the committee. And then the vice chair would assume the duties of the chair in their absence, and also for any other duties as the chair may assign the vice chair. So I just wanted to point out that language.
Thank you. That's a more precise statement than I made, so I appreciate it.
May I ask a clarifying question? With the annual report and in light of the Brown Act, is it appropriate if we said sort of, here's the 10 things we're going to address in the annual report, and let's divide them up between each of the board members?
Yeah, I would expect probably we might have a subcommittee that there's no provision for a subcommittee to meet to prepare something. And so you try and spread the workload as much as possible. But it's not, again, it's not a lengthy report, at least last time around. I have not looked recently at other reports, and my experience is now a decade old, so things may have changed.
I did some research, Jessica, that the reports that I've seen from other districts are like 4, 5, 6 pages, very, very high level and not written in legalese, very easy to understand, because it's directed at the community and, a lay person audience, if you will.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, does that answer your question?
Can you continue as the chairperson?
I did not, my wife's away, so I'm not consulted with her. Let me ask let me defer that question to just ask, is there anyone who's interested in being the chair?
And for me, it was clearly, I didn't know what it is entailing, and I'm still not 100% clear. So for me, learning from someone who has done it before would be better. And then maybe I might be interested next year, or, in the next 2, 3 days.
Like volunteering for the vice chairman.
It certainly did sound that way.
to see forms at 700 first to see.
Is there an opportunity to revisit our bylaws? I mean, I'm concerned if a number of us are concerned about Form 700, where do we end up as a committee?
The bylaws were adopted by the board and they have to be, any change to the bylaws have to be approved by the board by a 2/3 vote.
By the school board,
By school.
not our board, okay.
By our, so.
Thank you.
For purposes, frankly, of where we are in 700, that's something that may possibly get done on an accelerated basis, but that all depends on how the board evaluates and considers it.
That was the gist of my question, Jessica, is it a legal requirement or is it something that was inserted into the bylaws on a voluntary basis? And it sounds like the latter.
Right, it sounds like a letter, and it sounds like many of us are being caught off guard by that inclusion. And that wasn't made clear
Right.
at the outset or through the selection process. I personally haven't reviewed the form. I haven't had a chance to speak with a spouse about it. And so.
So Melissa, I feel like in the bylaws, when we originally looked
Oh,
up,
was it there?
it was there, but it said, I had no idea. It said you got to fill out Form 700 for disclosure. And I think that's straightforward. I spent probably 3 hours yesterday reviewing the form, doing my own legal research, and it is not only financial information about the committee member, but about his or her partner or spouse too. And it's incredibly voluminous. And my concern is if the deadline is April 3rd, that's pretty short. And if the school board's going to amend the bylaws, then that would presumably need to take place on an expedited basis. But if they're not amended, then as I said before, I will step down at the deadline of the due date, if you will.
I also don't understand the requirement if we don't approve anything. We're just reviewing and giving recommendations. We are not responsible for anything essentially. So why?
I think
is the
that is
requirement for the form?
that is the argument probably made by districts that don't require it.
Yeah.
As we've heard from the presentation, initial presentation, we don't have a decision-making authority with respect to the contracts,
Right,
with respect
exactly.
to selection of the contractors. So, I mean, the purpose of the Form 700 is to disclose a situation that might suggest a conflict of interest. And it
Right.
makes a lot of sense if somebody is in a decision-making role. You want to know if they have a conflict of interest. We're not in a decision-making role. We are in a role advising the public as to the nature and how things were carried out for this project. So I'm guessing there are probably arguments on both sides.
In my view was there's the Form 700, but there's also the ethics disclosure that each member has to sign, which says that you abide by conflict of interest policies, et cetera. So in my mind, that's an overarching umbrella from an ethics conflict of interest perspective. And clearly, the last bond measure in Mill Valley, there was not a Form 700 requirement put upon the committee members, and things worked great. So it's I guess my question is why change, and if that's going to limit the people's ability to participate on the committee, perhaps that's something the board should take up.
So I'm hearing your concern, you have not reviewed.
Yeah, I have to review with my partner, and it could be an issue in our family as well.
I would say same, I need to look at it in more detail.
Same here as well.
I read it, but you can go to the explanation under each schedule and find exemption or exception. There's a lot of exemption and exception.
That was my experience. It's going to depend on your individual situation.
Okay.
Some.
Roger, this is Kimberly Berman.
Yes,
May
Kim-
I recommend that perhaps you speak to the board president? There are meetings before April 3rd, and this could be considered by the Board of Trustees regarding the bylaws if you would want to take forth an amendment for that. So perhaps that's the best way to proceed at this time.
And thank you, Dr. Berman. So we do have a board scheduled meeting on Monday, this upcoming Monday. So I'm looking at Anna, but we do have time if that is a recommendation that you as the CBOC chair would like to make to the board to make a modification to the Mill Valley School District bylaws specifically for the CBOC for consideration. Again, as Sahi had mentioned, it just needs to be approved by a quorum or the majority of the board, and we do have a quorum on Monday.
I think it needs to be approved by 2/3.
Oh, is it Well, two-thirds is, we have two.
Under the bylaws.
Yes, yes,
Right.
thank you.
Okay. I think that's a great suggestion and let me, I would entertain a motion to defer election of the chair and the vice chair today. And then I continue to act as the interim chair, pending discussions to follow up on.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
That motion passes. We're just about at 11 o'clock, which was kind of my cutoff date. So let's talk about thank you for that discussion. It was very helpful. Let's address the email addresses. Is that a short one, Michelle?
Anna,
Yes, so this morning, I sent you all out, an email to your new email address, to your old email addresses. That gives you your, new email and your, password. I also sent you some instructions on logging in, just in case you're going to know how to do this. So you just go into Google, sign in, as if you're signing into Gmail with your accounts. And I suggest you keep your CBOT business in those accounts rather than using your personal again for the public records request potential somewhere down the line, and make sure that don't reply all. I will send anything out to you with BCCs, so you cannot reply all. But just be careful to stay out of those serial meetings. Do you have any questions on that? Okay, great. Let me know if you get the pickle with it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next item is times and dates for meetings. My suggestion would be that I believe that the bylaws provide that we have to have at least one meeting a year. We're clearly going to do that. And that I think we may have two presentations is not required to the board within the year, but other than that, there's not a big schedule. I think probably last time we had quarterly meetings and may have had more accelerated schedule as we got into the depth of the work itself. So I would suggest that we schedule quarterly meetings with visions going forward for meetings as appropriate for specific issues or for a more complex stage of the process. Does that make sense for everyone?
I agree. And looking at, I think there was a preliminary schedule for this year's meetings. And I guess to me, the related point is depending upon what the board composition is and the chairperson of the board, that schedule might need to get revisited from an availability. I think those are like placeholder dates that were set some time ago. So I just wanted to note that.
I think that's right. And I think just in terms of when things will occur, I believe there may be a change in the superintendent sometime in July. Is it scheduled?
So if I could just chime in, we now have emails established, so we can certainly poll availability of members. I will say that the superintendent announcement, or I should say, the selection process will be going through May and will likely come to the board. It must be at a regularly scheduled board meeting, so that may be at the end of May. With that in mind, I would recommend that we potentially postpone the scheduled June meeting and hold a meeting with the new superintendent, which that would be a date to be determined.
Okay.
And Anna, is that the appropriate schedule?
Yes.
So we keep that, we postpone that date at this point or keep that date and then
I think the June 15th meeting, we should probably postpone, push out, because we will want to include our new superintendent. We are slated to have a new superintendent announced likely at the end of May, and then that person hopefully will start July 1. Generally speaking, our board is dark in July, but we can certainly schedule potentially a meeting in August based on the CBOC's availability.
okay.
And then we would have an August meeting and a September meeting, because
It would likely be.
then it starts August and we move from there in terms of quarterly.
I think that could be determined by the CBOC.
So you think August is preferable to July?
Yes.
In regards to the project and get updates, we're invited to the monthly board meeting, so we will have an update, so yeah.
Yes, and you'll also be added to the board agendas, and generally speaking, like at the March board agenda meeting, the project list was attached and you're always welcome to join. Those are all open to the public and available via Zoom.
Okay, so I would entertain a motion to postpone the June meeting to have a meeting to be set subject to the availability of the committee members in August, and that we not postpone or address the September meeting at this point.
Agreed, so moved.
Second,
Okay.
you all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. There you go. Let's see.
Have you thought on the time of day? Did we have these?
Thank you very much. I had written that down and I was just about to get to that point. We met in the evenings for the first round, for virtually all the time, maybe the first couple of meetings. And I know that's an imposition on you and on the district. But I think in the interest of, especially if we're going to have Zoom meetings, in the interest of having the public available, I would like to see evening meetings. And I'll just entertain discussion on that point right now.
Certainly preferable for me, work schedules and things.
And me as well, my own schedule, but then also the public access point is really critical too.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, so
And it's, I would just interject, it's not the imposition for us, it's only quarterly, we can certainly accommodate that. I just did want to, I think Sehi is still on the line. With the request for Zoom meetings, I think the CBOC should discuss whether or not your membership presence should still be in person, similar to regular board meetings, but the Zoom link is open for access to the public. The reason why I mentioned that is if it is decided and allowable to have a CBOC member Zoom in, there is a requirement to still have a quorum of the board, as well as the need to post the agenda wherever your venue may be. So I just wanted to, I think that there is a recommendation from legal counsel to continue to hold your meetings in person, and the Zoom link have access for the public. And we can certainly organize that, you know, you all should select the preferred time parameters. I know in the past, Roger, we did everything from 4, 5, 6 start, PM start, whatever the preferences of the CBOC.
yeah, and it's my understanding that if you have a Zoom meeting that allows a member to participate remotely, that member has to open up his or her location for the public to be there. So it's not something you do easily.
I would say that the evening meetings are good to me. The 4 to 6 time window is really challenging for me personally. So if we're gonna do evenings, like let's do evenings, not late afternoons, is my preference.
And we agree 6 o'clock.
Yes.
Okay. Let's have a motion to set the time for the this meeting and meetings following. This is second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passed. All right, we're a little past 11. Just thank you for your time. I guess let's just have a very quick, anything in particular you'd like to see at the next meeting. And we can, obviously you can communicate otherwise, but I just want to have this discussion now. And anything in particular that this meeting didn't work for you. Yes.
Well, I remember that you were saying June was challenging. Does August mean that you would be further along to present?
A little less challenging.
Yeah, I
think
appreciate being
progress,
realistic.
Full
right?
progress will be, this, realistically, it will take 6 months to get to a point where we're like, okay. We know 100% where we're going. Is a lot of things are gonna happen over the next.
Okay,
Thanksgiving time.
Oh, if that's, I guess I was optimistically thinking September.
I was
but
thinking
We could
September.
maybe look at, when CBOs meets again, maybe October or November. So I think we can, once we have the architect of record, I think that will be very telling for us.
Regardless, we can provide updates whenever your meeting is, so.
okay, good. And just from my perspective, I've kind of studied the master plan a little bit in this, but at some point, it would help me if there was a little bit more detail on, not necessarily on the middle school, because I think that's harder to deal with, but just a presentation of what's expected. I think it was for the other schools, just so I can frame that a little bit better. Okay, well, I think it's time to adjourn, so I don't think I need a motion for that. I'm going to adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much.